Greetings, friends. We hear a lot these days about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, how the police are violating the Charter, how our governments are violating all of our freedoms. And they're all going to be proven wrong because the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is on our side. And so just you wait. Well, what if the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is not our friend? What if it's a double-edged sword at best? And at worst, what if it's not what we thought it was? What if it's actually part of the problem? Because, I'm not a legal expert here, but if you go to Wikipedia just to see the basic information about the Charter, you will read that, I already knew this, but it was enacted by the Liberal Party of Canada. It was formally enacted by the British Parliament as part of the Canada Act in 1982, at the request of the Parliament of Canada, under the government of Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau. So keep that in mind. Trudeau, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So if you're all suffering under Trudeau Jr., but you're calling upon one of the chief accomplishments of his father to save you, it's a bit of a contradiction there. And then it goes on explaining how the Charter greatly expanded the scope of judicial review. This I don't know much about. More taking, I guess some would criticize it for taking more authority from Parliament and giving it to the courts, which would be officials serving for a long time or life, and whereas you can elect the parliamentary officials, so maybe taking more power away from the people. But I don't have a dog in that fight, that issue. I can see how it could be a problem, but I don't really trust Parliament. I don't trust judges, and I don't trust politicians. So it makes no difference to me. But that's sort of beside the point. The main things we're interested in the Charter is, and why people keep bringing it up in the assault on our freedoms, is because in Section 2 they list the fundamental freedoms, namely freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of the press and of other media of communication. Freedom of peaceful assembly, that is the important one. And freedom of association. So freedom of peaceful assembly is the individual rights or ability of people to come together and collectively express, promote, pursue, and defend their collective or shared ideas. So basically it means you can assemble in public. It's an enshrined right in Canada. And that's exactly what we cannot do right now in Ontario. You cannot gather with 5 persons or more. That is forbidden. And it's crazy to even say that. But it's true. So in this context, someone looks at the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and they can be forgiven for saying, well, this charter is on our side. So why am I skeptical? Why am I saying there's an irony here? There's a few other things in the charter here, but I think you get the idea about what it's about. Well, the scholar Ricardo Duchesne, he wrote in his book Canada in Decay, he talks practically in a whole chapter about the concept of human rights and how this is actually used to destroy or subjugate nations. And this Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms takes its example. It follows from the UN Declaration of in 1948, the United Nations had there was a Universal Declaration of Human Rights after World War II. So this is fundamentally it's ad hoc philosophy, meaning there's no coherent foundation here. It's just these abstract values. It's atheistic. There's no God. It's a completely secular, materialistic system. So that's why the thing is about this charter is there's a notwithstanding clause. So this just complicates the matter even further. The notwithstanding clause has been invoked by Quebec, the province of Quebec, because, and they did, by the way, Quebec did not support the enactment of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Isn't that interesting? Why would Quebec not be a fan of that? Because they have had, and they still do have, more of a national consciousness than the rest of Canada, because they were outnumbered by originally the English speakers and now every other nation on earth. So that would make sense to me. And so they have invoked routinely this notwithstanding clause to suspend some charter rights. And also the provinces of Saskatchewan and Alberta have also invoked the notwithstanding clause to end a strike and to protect a heterosexual definition of marriage. So I'm not sure if they still have protected that. I would be interested to know. I thought all of Canada permits gay marriage, as far as I would have thought so. But anyways, so you see it's a bit. So you see how you see what I'm getting at is United Nations ideas of human rights, and then the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which follows from that. It's used to splinter. It's multiculturalism at its base most basic, and it splinters a nation or a civilization by sort of just like supporting all the other different groups that might have made it in there. Now they can grow at the expense of the host culture. It's going to make, because it's going to recognize them all legally equally. So therefore, any other culture that's not Western, it's going to be on an equal legal, or at least, if not implicitly more, they're going to be able to splinter the cultural landscape. You're going to have a very diverse civilization, and a diverse civilization cannot hold together. That's what history shows, and that's what we're seeing play out right now. And actually, why have we not been able to resist the removal of our freedoms is because largely we live in a multicultural society. There's different reasons, like we got weaker, we get weaker men, but that goes along with having such a divided landscape of people cultural landscape. People don't think all the same. Cultures don't all think the same. Like other cultures, they look at the Canadian, they don't care what is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They don't care. Legitimately, I don't want to say that there's no benefit to the Charter. When we get in the legal fights to come, yeah, the Charter probably will have significance. But as we've seen, governments can choose when and when they don't want to observe it. Observe the what it says to do. Just like any constitution, they make exceptions, or they ignore things, or they assume that you'll never be able to take them to court in all the cases. They do whatever they can to avoid court. But if it does go to court, you still rely on the judges cooperating with you. And judges are politically biased. They're not above petty politics in many cases. So I just thought that I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm not negative about this. I do think there will be some benefit to having the charter, because in some sense it'll be a double-edged sword, but in other cases it's just not something you want to rely on. You want to look ahead, because if you want to survive, you need to have a coherent culture, and you can't have human rights, because human rights is antithetical to a coherent culture. It doesn't, maybe that sounds surprising to you, but Like human rights, that's how you start to splinter a coherent culture. And if you have a good coherent culture, then that's the situation from which freedom, as much freedom as should be good for you, that can thrive in that situation. But you have to. There's inevitably going to be a need to clamp down on other certain practices here and there. It's inevitable. Otherwise, you won't have that unity from which your security. You need strength to get security and freedom. That has to come from a place of strength, right? It can't just come from this endless multicultural splintering, which is that's what human rights is. That's what the concept is. I mean, there are things you can talk about God-given rights. You can talk about, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal. You can talk of all those things. That's another discussion. We're not having an ethics or philosophy discussion here. This is legal, secular stuff. Hasta luego, amigos.